is a tutorial of how to play Water by Salatiel, Pharrell, and Beyonce on the clarinet. I'm Jessica, and I love the clarinet and I love pop music, and I think there's a lot we can learn about combining them both together. Great pop songs and great pop singers have a lot to teach us about how to be musical, how to keep our sound consistent, and how to think about form and overall musical construction. Definitely feel free to jump around and use the tabs at the bottom to know where to skip based on what sections you want to listen to. If you're a more advanced student, feel free to jump around and skip over the beginning where I do the scale that we're based on. But even if you are an advanced student, it's good to check in on your scales and make sure you're conceiving of your music as being related to the scales that you practice. We're going to need D minor for this. If you don't know any minor scales, that's okay. Our D minor scale has just one flat, B flat, which is also what we have in our F major scale. D, E, F, G, A, B flat in the back, C, D. So there's a couple different ways to think about our minor scales. Our parallel major is D major and D minor, and then our relative major is F, and that's because D minor has the same key signature as F major. So I'm going to go over all of these for you. So first, here is our D major scale. You've probably seen this before if you've done some of the other videos, so I'll do this a little bit faster. Our D minor, if we relate it to D major, is instead of F sharp as our third note, going to have a flat third. And then, when we get to our 6th and 7th note, which is going to be B natural and C sharp, we're going to lower them. So in our major scale, and then instead in our minor, flat 3, flat 6, flat 7. So here's that scale a little bit slower. Now, another way to think about this scale is related to our F major scale. F, F, I'll start from here. Just has one flat, B flat, which maybe you noticed was our pattern in our D minor scale. So if we were to do the second octave of our F scale, we're going to go through all of the notes that we already learned for our D minor. So if we do the exact same scale, F major scale that I just played, but we start on D and we stop a little bit early on D, that's our D minor scale. F major. We'll see in this piece, we get the chorus, and then a transition, and then the verse, and then we go back to the chorus, and then another transition, and then the verse again, and then the chorus. So that's going to be our form for this. So there's only 3 parts that we really need to know. So we're going to start with our chorus, the really fun part. Here's our opening just a little bit slower. Phrasing here is at the end of the phrase, he has this really lovely sort of voice trill, melisma, and vibrato thing that he's doing, and that's really helping carry the energy of the phrase forward. And to do that, I'm going to do that with a very tiny, subtle crescendo through the last note. It's a little bit overdone. Here is if I do nothing, if I hold it totally flat. It still sounds fun because it's a fun melody, but we really lose the way that the phrase goes forward when we add in these extra tools, whether you're using a vocal trill or a vibrato or just a really subtle crescendo. And then we're in our post-chorus transition. This is going to have mostly mi, re, do. It's just going to be based on our scale, and when you know your scale, it's super simple. We want to be blowing subtly through those notes at the end to keep the phrase going and to build excitement to the end of the phrase. When you crescendo, you want to think about your air support as coming from here. Think about the air flowing through your body and out. And you might want to watch out that your tongue doesn't drop. A lot of players, when they start to crescendo, they have really good instincts like getting their air flowing. But when their tongue drops, it changes their sound, especially on throat tones like open G. So I was able to do a really big crescendo that time, but I cheated a little bit and it affected my sound. My tongue dropped inside my mouth. My tongue is lowering and flattening, and it's letting a lot of air out really quickly, but it's also changing my sound quality in a way that we don't want. And now here's our verse with Pharrell. So I'll break that down a little. We're going to repeat that a couple times. This is really based on our F scale. So we know this, it's related to our D minor, and it's within our D minor, but it focuses a little bit on a scale, if you know your major scales, you might be more familiar with. So I think it's totally fine to conceive of this specific verse as being in F major if it helps you. So. And then he slides around a little bit. Like this whole piece has a lot of really fun, subtle vocal movements up and down. It's harder for us to match that on our instrument. So some of this you can add a little bit to on your own. Just stay within this key when you add in new notes. Or you can go with just the basics and use your phrasing to get a lot of the same effects. But one of the ones that I think is most important to decide if you want to do is right here. You can add in another E. So that when he says leave, you can slide down to the E, or you can wait until the next note to add in your E. I think it's totally up to you, but you want to make sure your phrasing matches that, whether or not you actually go to E faster. You can build a little bit of tension and then release it. I'm doing that a little bit with my articulation and my air and my dynamics. So now we've seen all three parts of the song that we're going to need. And so we're going to repeat all of that in the piece. They add a terrible change by adding in the different voices together. You can play around with either making it familiar so that when your listener hears the same part again, you draw on what the person already knows. We really like familiar sounding music when we listen to it on the radio. So you can play with that. Or you can say, you've heard this before, I'm going to do it a little bit differently and change your dynamics or your phrasing or some other aspect of your playing to make a new musical idea with something that people have already heard so that it's new and interesting. And a lot of music that we do in the classical tradition draws on balancing these two differences, making it something that we recognize, but also making something new and different. When we get to Beyonce's version of the verse, she, of course, does it a little bit differently. This is where we get to balancing things that we've heard before with something new. She adds new notes at the end of the verse. So let's go over the beginning. It's going to start the same. Right, so we do that a couple times. And then instead of what Pharrell just did, she goes. Extra thing if you want. This is a slightly adapted version of a little instrumental guitar lick at the beginning.